My name is Evadne Whitmore, and at 71, I like to think of myself as a woman who still keeps her suitcase close to the door. Retirement hasn't dulled my appetite for travel. Or for family. I was up before sunrise that morning, humming as I moved around my small kitchen in Charleston. The kettle whistled. My favorite mug steamed with Earl Grey, and my overnight bag sat ready by the door. The cruise was supposed to be our first real family trip in years. I had even bought a wide-brimmed hat for afternoons on deck, imagining my granddaughter tucked against me as the Atlantic stretched out around us. Lila, my only daughter, had sounded so cheerful when we booked it, promising this would be the trip that resets everything. I held onto that phrase as if it were a ticket itself. I poured a little honey into my tea and checked my phone out of habit. One message glowed at the top of the screen. From Lila. You won't come with us on the cruise. My mother-in-law prefers it to be just family. I read it once, then again, and a third time, as if repetition could change the words. The steam from my cup blurred my glasses, but the letters stayed sharp, unyielding. Just family. The phrase landed harder than I could have expected. My chest tightened, and for a moment I simply stood there, mug in hand, unable to move. It wasn't only that I'd been left behind. It was the reason those two words that erased me, as though my blood and bone no longer counted. Outside, Charleston stirred awake. Gulls calling from the harbor. Inside, my kitchen felt suddenly airless. I set the phone down on the counter with more care than it deserved. On the hallway chair, my passport waited in its leather sleeve. I had tucked it there the night before, certain I'd be asked to show it at the terminal that morning. I thought of the deposit I'd made to secure their cabin, the card I'd used for the booking. My name was on every receipt. My name was also on something else, something they had perhaps forgotten. I left my tea untouched and went to the study. The leather file sat in its drawer, the one I hadn't opened in months. Inside were the papers that told a story different from my daughter's message, a story written in signatures and ink. The leather folder creaked as I laid it open on my desk. I had kept every document neatly filed, carefully dated because habit is hard to shake when you've worked a lifetime as an administrator. But I had never expected to need these papers as proof against my own child. The deed was there. My name pressed in black ink, steady as a gravestone. I traced the lines with my finger, remembering the afternoon Lila and her husband first walked me into that bank. They had been so young then, eager, nervous, their credit too thin to stand on its own. Mom, if you could just sign with us, she had pleaded, sliding the forms across the table. It's just a formality that tethered me to 30 years of obligation. I paid the down payment when they fell short. I covered property taxes the year her husband lost his job. And just last month, the final check that cleared the mortgage came not from their account, but from mine, drawn quietly from the pension I had earned over decades of early mornings and late nights. I remembered how I had slipped that receipt into this very folder, telling myself it was worth it for Lila, worth it for the promise of Sunday dinners in that dining room, for the chance to watch my granddaughter grow up under a roof I had helped secure. Now, staring at the neat stack of canceled checks and closing statements, I felt the split between what the papers said and what my daughter's message implied. On paper, I was indispensable. In life, I was excessive. The contrast hollowed me. The law recognized me as an owner, my family, as an intruder. I closed the folder gently, though every muscle in me wanted to slam it shut. The truth was sitting right here in my lap, undeniable, unblinking. If the law still called me an owner, why was I letting love erase me? I leaned back in my chair, the folder closed but still pulsing like a wound at my side. The papers reminded me of more than signatures. They pulled up memories I had tried to bury under forgiveness. I thought of Christmas, 3 years ago. The dining room smelled of rosemary and ham. The table set with my mother's china. I had imagined us gathered close, 3 generations at once. But when I arrived, my chair was no longer beside Lila. Her mother-in-law, Claudette, had decided it was more convenient for me to sit near the kitchen door. I laughed it off at the time, though I spent the evening half listening to the scrape of serving dishes while the family conversation swirled at the other end. Then there was the baby shower for my granddaughter. I learned about it after the fact, through a photograph sent to my phone. A blur of balloons and smiling faces. I told myself it was an oversight, that young couples get caught up in planning. But my chest had burned all the same. I framed the photo anyway, because what else could I do? And the words always, the words. Mom, you're too intense. I heard it first from Lila, her voice rehearsed and patient, as though I were a child. Later, I caught Claudette saying it too, her tone sharper, more dismissive. I convinced myself it was coincidence, that Lila wasn't simply echoing what she had heard. Each time, I made excuses. I was too loud, too eager, too protective. I carried the blame because it was easier than admitting the truth. Now, with the cruise message still burning in my mind, I saw it differently. None of it was chance or immaturity. It was a slow edging out, a deliberate choreography that moved me further and further to the margins until one day, I woke up to find myself outside altogether. How many small cuts does it take before you finally notice you're bleeding? The next morning, the winter light slipped pale across my kitchen counter. I hadn't slept well, too many memories pressing against me, but I still opened my laptop, as I always did. Scanning through the news and my emails, at the top of the inbox was a notification from American Express Alert, new charge, $640. Serenity Deck Spa renewal. I stared at the line, then read it again. Serenity Deck. That was the spa on the ship. My ship. The one I wasn't allowed to board. I felt a slow heat rise in me. Months earlier, when we booked the trip, I had offered to put the reservations on my card. It'll be easier. I'd told Lila. She had smiled in relief, promising to reimburse me, promising to take care of the rest. My card had stayed attached to their booking. Still open, still vulnerable. It wasn't just a charge for oils and facials. It was a message in numbers. They had sailed away, left me behind, and still spent what was mine. The exclusion had been emotional. This was financial. Together, they formed a truth I could no longer excuse. I picked up the phone and called the number on the back of the card. My voice was steady as I spoke. That charge wasn't authorized. Cancel the card. The woman on the line asked if I had lost it. Yes, I said after a pause. Yes, I lost it. I lost the trust that came with it. When I hung up, my hands trembled, not with weakness but with release. For the first time in years, I had drawn a line. When trust is stolen, is the first repayment revenge or clarity? 2 days after canceling the card, I found myself walking up the narrow staircase of an office on Meeting Street. The brass plate on the door read, Carlos Benton, attorney at law. I had known Carlos for over 30 years, back when he was a junior partner and I was settling my late husband's estate. He had a habit of listening more than he spoke, a trait that had made him a rarity in Charleston's legal circles. He rose slowly from behind his mahogany desk, his white hair combed neatly back, and shook my hand with the same courtesy he always had. Evadne, he said warmly. You don't call unless it matters. I set the leather folder down between us. It matters. He read the documents in silence. The room filled with nothing but the tick of the clock on the wall. Finally, he adjusted his glasses. Your name remains on the deed. There was no transfer filed with the county, No quitclaim. Nothing to remove your interest. By law, you are still co-owner. In practice, he tapped the page you have authority to sell outright, if you wish. You don't need their consent. The air seemed to thin around me. My chest tightened, and my hands trembled in my lap. All those years of giving, of excusing, of being grateful for crumbs, and here, in plain language, was the truth I had overlooked. The house wasn't theirs to dictate. It was mine to decide. Carlos leaned forward. If you want to pursue this, I'll need to see your accounts. Copies of the mortgage receipts, tax records. We'll also schedule an inspection to prepare for sale. It's straightforward, but we'll do it by the book. I drew in a long breath and steadied my voice. If they want distance, they'll have it. Legally, as I left his office, the afternoon sun poured over Meeting Street, casting sharp shadows. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt the weight of choice pressing into my hands, heavier than betrayal, but steadier. Like the grip of a pen waiting to sign. What's heavier, the weight of betrayal? Or the weight of the pen that can undo it? Back at the house, I began the quiet work of sorting through drawers. I told myself it was just preparation, pulling out the heirlooms I would never trust to strangers. My mother's porcelain teapot, the quilt stitched by my grandmother's hands, the silver Lila once said she didn't like because it looked old. Each object carried a history, though none of them seemed welcome in hers. In the bottom of the secretary desk, behind a stack of empty envelopes, I found a thin blue folder. It wasn't mine. My name wasn't written on it. Curious, I opened it. Inside were printouts of emails, neatly clipped together. The sender, my daughter. The recipient, Claudette, her mother-in-law. I skimmed the first few lines, then stopped cold. They had discussed the house, my house, as if it already belonged to them. Claudette's words were clinical. If we can show extended occupancy and consistent utilities in your names, we may be able to push for a quitclaim transfer. The county tends to accept long-term residency as a sign of rightful ownership. And Lila's reply, softer, but no less wounding. We just need to hold on. Eventually, it will all be ours. My hands shook as I read, not from surprise, but from recognition. The patterns I had excused weren't misunderstandings. They were tactics. I felt a surge of rage, sharp and clean, but it didn't crush me. It steadied me. They had plotted in secret, but they were too late. Carlos had already confirmed the law was on my side. Their scheme was nothing more than paper without teeth. I slipped the printouts back into the folder and carried it to my leather case. When I slid it inside, between the deed and the mortgage receipts, I felt an unexpected calm. When you discover they plotted against you, do you cry or finally stop doubting yourself? The decision, once spoken aloud in Carlos's office, moved faster than I could have imagined. He recommended a discreet realtor, a woman named Margaret Haynes, whose specialty was quiet sales for clients who valued privacy over signage. Margaret had kind eyes and a firm handshake, and she didn't blink when I explained I wanted no for sale sign, no gossip drifting across the neighborhood. We'll do this clean, she said. Cash buyers only. 3-week escrow. You'll be free before the leaves change. Within days. She had a buyer, a young couple relocating from Atlanta. They walked through the house once, nodded at the sturdy beams and sunlit kitchen, and made their offer. Cash. No contingencies. Closing set for exactly 3 weeks later. The date already circled on my calendar. From that day forward, my life became a checklist. Each task, once a burden, now felt like a small declaration of freedom. Cancel remaining utility auto payments. Schedule inspection. box heirlooms, and place in storage. Notify Carlos of closing date. I wrote each line in my notebook and marked it with a steady hand. The closing itself passed in a single morning. Papers signed, funds transferred, title officially in my name no longer. I slipped the keys into Margaret's palm, feeling the weight leave me as though I'd set down a heavy stone. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. The man changed every lock, polished the knobs, and handed me 2 new sets of keys. I tucked one into my purse, the other into a jar marked lemon tea on the highest shelf of my kitchen. Finally, I typed out a single page, bold letters across the top. Property sold. All communication through counsel. I taped one copy to the front door and placed another on the entry table. No anger, no pleading, just fact. As I stood back, the new locks gleaming in the evening light, I felt something deeper than victory. Locking those doors wasn't only about keeping others out, it was about shutting away the years of manipulation I had once called love. If silence became your sharpest weapon, would you wield it on the evening the ship returned to Charleston Harbor? The air was thick with salt and humidity. I wasn't there to see the gangway lower or the passengers spill out with their rolling suitcases. By then, I was already 2 hours down the coast at my cousin Teresa's cottage. The windows opened to the steady rhythm of waves, but I could imagine it as clearly as if I were standing on the porch. Lila, her husband Ethan, Claudette, and my granddaughter would have walked up the familiar street, their laughter weary from travel. The porch light that usually burned a soft welcome was dark. Suitcases thudded against the steps. Ethan reached for the lock, turned the key, and found only resistance. He tried again. Nothing. That was the moment. I knew. When the silence spoke. Taped across the door, stark against the wood, was the notice property sold. All communication through counsel. Beneath it, Carlos's name and office number in clean black print. Inside, another copy waited on the entry table, though they would never cross the threshold to see it. Neighbors would have noticed. Of course, curtains shifting, whispers on porches. Charleston is a city where nothing stays secret for long, but I hadn't left a trace for them to twist. No raised voices, no confrontation in the driveway, just the still authority of a lock that no longer answered to their keys. By morning, I heard from Teresa that the story was already spilling onto social media. Claudette posted a carefully lit photo of her daughter and granddaughter, captioned with vague lines about toxic boundaries and healing from betrayal, but the comments turned quickly. Someone asked, "Was the house even in your name?" Another. Sharper still, "Everyone in town knows Evadne paid for it." The narrative unraveled faster than she could stitch it together. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Years of defending myself had left me hoarse. Now the paperwork defended me better than words ever could. My absence did more than presence ever had. It forced them to sit with consequence in a driveway they once claimed as theirs. I sat on Teresa's porch that night, the sea breeze tugging at my hair, and lifted a cup of tea to my lips. For the first time, the quiet felt like triumph. When the locks don't turn, who do you blame, the door or the choices that led you there? The sale closed cleanly, and with it came a freedom I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for all these years. I left Teresa's cottage after a week and returned to Charleston. Not to the old neighborhood, but to a quieter part of town, near the public library. The townhouse I chose was modest, 2 bedrooms and a small balcony, shaded by crepe myrtles. No sprawling lawn to tend. No heavy mortgage binding me to anyone's whims, just enough space for me and the life I wanted to carry forward. On my first morning there, I unpacked slowly, savoring the emptiness. My mother's porcelain teapot found its place on the kitchen shelf. The quilt, folded carefully, draped over the back of a chair. These things felt different here, not reminders of what had been dismissed, but proof of what I had preserved. Practical matters followed. I met with Carlos again, this time to update my will. My wishes were simple. My granddaughter would have a college fund, protected in her name. Money moved into a 529 account that Lila could not touch. Direct benefit. I told Carlos. No middle hands? He nodded, understanding without judgment. I also made another choice. The Charleston Senior Resource Center had a volunteer program, pairing retirees with others who needed help understanding finances, mortgages, and credit. I signed up within the month. On Tuesday mornings, I now sit at a long oak table, showing widows and veterans how to read contracts, how to recognize predatory lending, how to say no when family asks for just one signature. Each time, I see fragments of my old self across the table, and each time, I help someone avoid becoming her. Some nights, the ache still returns. The memory of laughter I wasn't invited to share, of milestones passed without me. But I no longer confuse absence with failure. Motherhood, I've learned, doesn't dissolve when children drift away. It changes shape. It narrows. It sharpens. And sometimes it folds back into self-preservation. On the townhouse balcony, I keep a wicker chair angled toward the street. In the evenings, I sit there with a cup of chamomile, the same tea that once soothed me through sleepless nights. Only now, I sip it without watching the phone, without rehearsing what I'll say if Lila calls. The quiet belongs to me, and I don't fill it with apology. The last light of day slides across the rooftops. Soft and forgiving, I hold the cup steady in both hands, breathing in the steam. I haven't lost the title of mother, I've reclaimed it on my own terms. And that is enough. If respect, not money, were the only inheritance you left, would your family treasure it or squander it?